The hazy light of ion storms flickered through the cracked viewports of the research outpost, casting unnatural shadows across Thalia Marin's workspace. She adjusted the calibration on her neural interface, wincing as the connector pinched against her temple. The outpost, little more than a collection of dilapidated habitats half buried in rusting starship wreckage, sat precariously on the edge of the Gliesa Rift, humanity's furthest venture into uncharted space. Recording begins. Thalia spoke into her datapad. Xenopsychology Survey Log, Day 73. Dr. Thalia Marin presiding. She paused, organizing her thoughts. 3 months on this forsaken outpost had yielded sparse results. The Gliesa sector contained dozens of potentially habitable worlds, but confirmed sapient contact remained elusive. Continuing analysis of species designation GR-117, colloquially named drift dancers by the survey team. Thalia's lips curled into a half-smile. Though Lieutenant Wren insists on referring to them as those floating gas bags in his reports, she pulled up the holographic data from yesterday's observation flight. The creatures, translucent, balloon-like organisms that rode the upper atmosphere of a nearby gas giant, exhibited complex movements that suggested rudimentary communication. They were beautiful, pulsing with bioluminescence as they navigated the planet's violent storms. Behavioral patterns indicate possible hive mind characteristics, though individual specimens demonstrate autonomous decision-making when separated from the group. Thalia rotated the hologram, scrutinizing the patterns. Intelligence assessment, pre-sapient at best. Recommendation, observation only. No contact protocols required. A sharp rap on the doorframe interrupted her recording. Lieutenant Jor Wren stood rigidly at the threshold, his military-issue uniform immaculate despite the outpost's perpetual dust. His dark eyes regarded her with familiar suspicion. "Another day categorizing floating blobs. Dr. Marin?" His voice carried the crisp edge of core world education. Thalia sighed, switching off her recorder. "They're not blobs, Lieutenant. They're highly specialized organisms that have evolved to—" "Spare me the lecture," Wren cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Command wants your assessment by 0800 tomorrow. We need to know if we're dealing with a contactable species. And I'll tell them exactly what I've been telling you for weeks," Thalia replied, keeping her voice even. "They're fascinating, but they're not sapient by any definition in the protocol." Wren's jaw tightened. "We didn't establish this outpost at considerable expense to study fascinating life forms. Doctor, we need results, contactable species, exploitable resources, strategic advantages." "That's not how science works," Thalia said, rising from her workstation. At her full height, she nearly matched the lieutenant's tall frame. "I won't falsify an assessment to satisfy Command's impatience." "Your idealism is noted," Wren said coldly, "as is your history of unconventional methods." The implied criticism stung more than Thalia cared to admit. Her unorthodox approach to xenopsychology had earned her both accolades and skepticism throughout her career, culminating in her assignment to this remote outpost, equal parts opportunity and exile. Before she could formulate a suitably cutting response, the habitat's door slid open with a hydraulic wheeze. Mox, the outpost's engineer, stomped in with a toolkit slung over one shoulder. Grease streaked his weathered face, and his gray-streaked hair stood in wild disarray. "If you two are done with your daily territorial display," he grunted, "we've got problems with the long-range sensors again. Those ion storms are playing havoc with the calibration." Wren's attention immediately shifted. "How bad?" "Bad enough that we're blind to anything beyond the immediate system," Mox replied, already moving toward the habitat's main control panel. "Could be missing an entire armada, and we wouldn't know until they were knocking on our doorstep." The lieutenant's posture stiffened even further. "Unacceptable! Fix it!" "What do you think I'm trying to do?" Mox muttered, prying open the access panel. "Unless you've suddenly developed engineering expertise to match your military bearing. Lieutenant. Thalia suppressed a smile. Mox was one of the few people who could speak to Ren that way, without consequence. His technical skills were indispensable to the outpost's survival, and everyone knew it, especially Ren. "I'll be inspecting the perimeter defenses," Ren announced stiffly. "Dr. Marin, I expect your full report, with proper classifications, by morning." After the lieutenant departed, Thalia helped Mox access the sensor array controls. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes before Mox spoke again. "That man needs to loosen his uniform collar before it cuts off blood to his brain," he observed, deftly rewiring a circuit board. "He's just doing his job," Thalia replied, though without much conviction. Mox snorted. "His job is military liaison, not scientific overseer. He forgets which side of the outpost management he's supposed to be on." Thalia handed him a calibration tool. "We're all on edge. 3 months out here with minimal contact from Central Command. It wears on people differently." "Speaks the psychologist," Mox said with a wry smile. "Always analyzing." "Xenopsychologist," she corrected automatically. "And yes, occupational hazard." Mox tightened the connection and closed the panel. "There. That should hold for now. At least until the next ion storm hits. Which, according to the atmospheric readings, will be in about 6 hours." "Enough time for me to finish my assessment and get some sleep," Thalia said, returning to her workstation. "Still chasing those gas bags?" Mox asked, gathering his tools. "They're called drift dancers," she corrected him. "And yes, there's something about their movement patterns. It's just on the edge of deliberate communication." Mox shrugged. "If you say so. Just don't let Ren pressure you into seeing intelligence where there isn't any. Man's desperate for a discovery to justify this outpost's budget." After Mox left, Thalia stared at the holographic renderings of the drift dancers, their ghostly forms undulating in simulated currents. Something about them reminded her of her sister, Eleni, the way they moved through their world with apparent abandon, unaware of being observed. Eleni had disappeared during the Berkeley riots back on Earth, just over 3 years ago. The authorities had declared her dead, along with 37 others, when the neural control system malfunctioned during the protest. But no body was ever recovered. Some days, Thalia could almost convince herself that her sister was still out there somewhere, wandering unaware that she was being mourned. Pushing the painful thoughts aside, Thalia reactivated her neural interface and resumed recording her observations. The familiar pressure of the device against her temple was both uncomfortable and reassuring, a physical tether to her work, to the present moment. Hours passed as she meticulously cataloged behavioral patterns, chemical analyses, and theoretical models of the creature's neural structures. The ion storm outside intensified, bathing her workspace in eerie purple light that pulsed through the viewports. Just as she was preparing to conclude for the night, her neural interface emitted a sharp, painful whine. Thalia gasped, clawing at her temple as unexpected data flooded the connection. The holographic display flickered wildly before stabilizing into an unfamiliar pattern, not the drift dancers, but something else entirely. A sequence of electromagnetic pulses, represented visually as jagged spikes across her screen. Thalia stared at the pattern, her heart racing. This wasn't coming from her recorded data. This was live, and it wasn't coming from the gas giant she'd been studying. With trembling fingers, she initiated a comparative analysis program. The results appeared almost instantly. The pattern matched human brainwave activity with 93.7% correlation. Someone, or something, was broadcasting a signal that mimicked human thought patterns. And according to her instruments, it was coming from the third planet in the system, a supposedly lifeless rock that the survey team had dismissed months ago as geologically interesting but biologically barren. Thalia's finger hovered over the communication button that would alert Lieutenant Wren. Protocol demanded she report this immediately, but something held her back. Intuition, perhaps. or the memory of Wren's dismissive attitude toward her work. She needed more data before involving military oversight. Redirecting the sensor array. Thalia focused on the mysterious planet. The signal continued, pulsing in an unmistakable pattern now that she knew what to look for. As she watched, the neural interface translated the pulses into a crude approximation of language, fragmented and alien, but unmistakably intentional. "Who sits in silence?" The words appeared on her screen, and Thalia felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't random noise. This was a directed query, aimed specifically at the outpost, at the human observers who had been watching this system for months. They weren't just being observed, they were being questioned. The realization shattered Thalia's scientific detachment. In an instant, she and her team had transformed from observers to observed, from scientists to subjects. Someone out there was not only aware of their presence, but was reaching out directly into their technology, into their minds, via the neural interfaces they all wore. With unsteady hands, Thalia activated the outpost's emergency communication system. "Lieutenant Wren, Engineer Mox, report to the main lab immediately," she announced, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "First contact protocol is now in effect." The shuttle bucked violently as it descended through the atmosphere of the third planet, designated GR-120 in their survey maps. Outside the reinforced viewports, ion storms painted the sky in electric blues and violets, sending electromagnetic pulses crashing against the shuttle's shields. "Shields holding at 60%, Mox called from the engineering station, his usual gruff demeanor intensified by concentration. "But I don't like these readings. The storm's intensity is increasing the closer we get to the surface." In the pilot's seat, Lieutenant Wren fought with the controls, his face a mask of grim determination. "Navigation systems are glitching. Switching to manual approach." Thalia clutched her datapad, monitoring the mysterious signal that had led them here. It continued unabated, a rhythmic pattern of pulses that increasingly resembled a heartbeat, if hearts could communicate in code. "The signal's getting stronger," she reported. "Definitely originating from the surface, somewhere in the northern hemisphere. I'm triangulating the exact coordinates now." "This is reckless," Wren muttered, not for the first time since they'd departed the outpost 12 hours earlier. "We should have waited for Command's response to our transmission. By the time we received orders, the signal could have disappeared," Thalia countered. "First contact protocol gives senior scientific staff discretionary authority in time-sensitive situations." "Convenient interpretation," Wren replied. But he didn't countermand her decision, which Thalia took as reluctant acceptance. The shuttle broke through the cloud layer, revealing the planet's surface for the first time. Thalia gasped. Below them stretched a landscape unlike anything in their survey records. Massive stone spires rose from the barren ground, like the fingers of buried giants. Each structure hundreds of meters tall and arranged in patterns too regular to be natural formation. The monoliths gleamed with a dull, metallic sheen, despite their apparently stone composition. "Those weren't on the orbital scans," Mox said, disbelief evident in his voice. "Impossible," Wren agreed, banking the shuttle to circle one of the larger formations. "We did a full geological survey of this planet 2 months ago. There was nothing but rock and dust." Thalia's neural interface hummed with activity as it processed the signal, which now pulsated in perfect synchronization with the strange structures below. "They're responding to us," she whispered. "Or we're responding to them. The frequency matches our neural interfaces exactly." "Are you saying these pillars are communicating with our implants?" Wren's skepticism was palpable. "I'm saying there's a correlation that can't be coincidental," Thalia replied, her scientific training battling with the awe of discovery. "Those structures are either generating the signal or amplifying it from another source." Mox pointed to a relatively flat area between several of the monoliths. "There's our landing zone," Lieutenant, looks stable enough, and it's close to the strongest signal source according to Dr. Marin's readings. Ren hesitated, his military caution warring with curiosity. Finally, he nodded. Preparing for landing, full defensive protocols remain in effect. Dr. Marin, I want you to limit your neural interface activity to passive recording only. No active transmission until we understand what we're dealing with. Agreed, Thalia said, though inwardly she chafed at the restriction. The chance to establish first contact with a genuinely alien intelligence was the opportunity of a lifetime, the vindication of her career. And perhaps, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, a way to finally move beyond Eleni's disappearance, to find purpose in discovery where she had failed in protection. The shuttle touched down with a jolt, sending dust swirling around the viewports. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence, absorbing the reality of their situation. They were the first humans to set foot on this world, possibly the first to encounter whatever intelligence dwelled here. Atmosphere readings, Ren asked, already donning his expedition gear. Thin, but breathable, Mox replied, checking the sensors. High nitrogen content, low oxygen, trace elements within acceptable parameters. Temperature outside is -15 Celsius. We'll need thermal gear, but not full environmental suits. Thalia prepared her sampling kit and adjusted her neural interface to its most sensitive recording setting. Despite Ren's caution, she wasn't about to miss a moment of this encounter. Remember, Ren said as they gathered at the airlock, we're here to observe and record only. No independent actions. No separation from the group. At the first sign of danger, we retreat to the shuttle. Is that clear? Crystal, Lieutenant, Mox replied with a mock salute. Clear, Thalia agreed, more soberly. Whatever her personal feelings about Ren's rigid approach, she understood the risks of first contact scenarios. Humanity's history, with its own divergent cultures, offered plenty of cautionary tales about cultural misunderstandings, leading to conflict. The airlock cycled, and bitter cold air rushed in, carrying the metallic tang of unfamiliar minerals. Thalia stepped onto the planet's surface, her boots crunching on what looked like ordinary gravel, but glittered with an inner luminescence when disturbed. The monoliths loomed overhead, casting long shadows in the pale light of the system's distant sun. Up close, their surfaces weren't smooth as they had appeared from the air, but covered in minute patterns, whorls and lines that resembled circuit boards, or perhaps an unknown script. Fascinating, Thalia breathed, approaching the nearest structure. Her neural interface hummed more intensely the closer she got, as if responding to proximity. Dr. Marin, Ren cautioned, maintain distance until we've established safety parameters. Ignoring him, Thalia reached out and placed her gloved hand against the monolith's surface. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A harmonic tone emanated from the structure, resonating through her body and causing her neural interface to flare with activity. The stone beneath her palm seemed to vibrate, though visually it remained solid. It's reacting to touch, she called to the others, her voice tight with excitement. There's some kind of response mechanism embedded in the material. Mox approached cautiously, scanning the monolith with his engineering tools. These readings don't make sense, he muttered. The composition appears to be standard silicate rock, but there are electromagnetic patterns running through it like a nervous system. Step back, both of you, Ren ordered, his hand moving to the weapon at his hip. Thalia reluctantly withdrew her hand, but the humming continued, both in the air around them and through her neural implant. The signal had changed, becoming more complex, layered with new frequencies. It's not just responding to us, she realized aloud. It's analyzing us. The signal pattern has shifted to match our individual neural signatures. You're saying these rocks are reading our minds? Ren's disbelief had an edge of alarm now. Not exactly, Thalia replied, struggling to articulate what her instruments were telling her. More like they're synchronizing with our thought patterns, establishing a baseline for communication. As if to confirm her theory, the ground beneath their feet began to glow with the same inner luminescence as the gravel, spreading outward from where they stood in concentric ripples. The pattern extended between several of the largest monoliths, forming what appeared to be a pathway. "It's directing us somewhere," Thalia said, already moving to follow the glowing trail. "Dr. Marin!" Ren's voice cracked with authority. "This is exactly the kind of independent action I explicitly forbade." Thalia paused, torn between scientific curiosity and military discipline. "Lieutenant, we have a potential first contact situation unfolding in real time. This could be an invitation, a greeting ritual. Refusing to engage could be interpreted as hostility. Or it could be leading us into a trap," Ren countered. Mox, who had been studying his readings in silence, looked up. "The signal source is definitely in the direction these lights are leading. And there's something else. A subterranean cavity about half a kilometer ahead. Could be some kind of structure." The tension between Thalia and Ren was palpable. Finally, the lieutenant exhaled sharply. "We proceed together, with extreme caution, weapons ready, sensors at maximum sensitivity. At the first sign of danger, we abort. No heroics. No scientific curiosity overriding safety protocols. Understood?" "Understood," Thalia agreed, trying to mask her excitement. Whatever waited at the end of this glowing path, she was determined to be the one to document humanity's first encounter with a truly alien intelligence. They followed the luminescent trail between towering monoliths, each step carrying them deeper into the alien landscape. The structures seemed to hum in harmony as they passed, creating a symphony of tones that resonated with their neural interfaces. Thalia recorded everything, from the visual spectacle to the complex waveforms flooding her implant. The path led them to what appeared to be a sheer rock face at the base of the largest monolith yet, a towering spire that dwarfed the others. As they approached, the solid stone rippled like water, revealing an opening that had not been visible moments before. "Some kind of holographic concealment," Mox muttered, scanning the phenomenon. "Or a material property we've never encountered before." Ren raised his hand, signaling a halt. "This is far enough. We're not entering an unknown subterranean environment without proper reconnaissance." "The signal is coming from inside," Thalia argued, her neural interface almost painfully active now. "This is what we came for, Lieutenant." Before Ren could respond, the opening in the rock face pulsed with light, and a new message formed in Thalia's neural feed. "Who sits in silence? Who observes without being observed?" The words weren't in any human language, yet her mind interpreted them as clearly as if they had been spoken aloud. The translation came not from her equipment, but from some deeper connection between her consciousness and whatever intelligence dwelled within the stone. "It's asking who we are," she whispered. "It wants to know about us." "How do you know that?" Ren demanded. "Because it's in my head," Thalia replied, tapping her temple where the neural interface connected. "Not just data anymore. Actual communication." Mox looked unsettled. "It's affecting my systems too. Engineering readouts are being overlaid with patterns, images I can't quite make sense of." Ren's jaw tightened. "This is exactly why neural interfaces are considered a security risk in first contact scenarios. They're too vulnerable to outside influence. Or too effective at facilitating communication," Thalia countered. "Lieutenant, this is unprecedented. We need to respond, to engage." The opening pulsed again, more urgently. The message repeated, and this time, Thalia felt not just words, but emotion behind them. Curiosity, wariness, ancient patience. "I'm going in," she decided, moving toward the entrance before Ren could stop her. "This is what I was trained for, what we all came out here to find." Ren grabbed her arm. "That's a direct violation of my orders, Doctor." Thalia met his gaze steadily. Then, relieve me of duty when we get back to the outpost. But right now, scientific authority takes precedence in a first contact scenario, according to Protocol Section 17B. You can come with me or wait here, but I'm proceeding. After a tense moment, Ren released her arm. We all go, or none of us goes. Fine by me, Mox interjected. I'm not missing whatever's in there, and I'm certainly not standing out here alone. Together. They stepped through the rippling entrance into darkness that quickly gave way to an eerie, ambient glow. They found themselves in a vast cavern that seemed impossibly large to exist within the monolith they had entered. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters overhead, supported by natural columns that had been shaped into more of the circuit-like patterns they had observed outside. But it was what filled the cavern floor that left them speechless. Stretching before them in ordered rows were thousands of crystalline formations, each one a translucent column that rose from floor to ceiling, glowing with inner light that pulsed in synchronized patterns. The crystals varied in size and complexity, some simple prisms while others twisted into elaborate helices and lattices. My God, Mox breathed. It's like a forest made of living crystal. Thalia's neural interface was nearly overwhelmed with input now. The pulses from the crystalline forest matched human brainwave patterns, even more closely here. Alpha waves, beta waves, delta waves, all mimicked in light and resonance. They're alive, she whispered. Sentient. The whole formation is a single, unified consciousness distributed across these crystalline structures. As if responding to her recognition, the pulse patterns shifted, becoming more complex. New messages formed in her mind. Observers have come. Listeners have arrived. The silence is broken. It knows we're here, Thalia said aloud, for Ren and Mox's benefit. It's acknowledging our presence. Ren scanned the crystal forest, his military training visibly battling with awe. Can you communicate back? Can you ask what it wants? Thalia concentrated, focusing her thoughts through her neural interface. We are humans from Earth. We are explorers, seeking knowledge and peaceful contact with other intelligent species. The response came immediately, flooding her mind with concepts rather than words. Silence is watchful. Fear the silent observer. We were first. The crystals pulsed more rapidly, their light intensifying until the entire cavern blazed with it. Thalia felt pressure building in her neural interface, as if the device was struggling to process the volume of information being transmitted. Something's wrong, Mox warned, checking his instruments. The energy output is increasing exponentially. It's affecting our technology. Ren's communication device sparked and went dead at his belt. Hostile action, he concluded, drawing his weapon. We need to retreat. No, Thalia protested. It's not hostile, it's trying to communicate. Our technology just can't handle the bandwidth. But even as she spoke, Thalia felt her own neural interface growing hot against her temple. The crystal forest's pulses had synchronized perfectly with her brainwaves now, creating a feedback loop that threatened to overload the device, and possibly her mind with it. We're leaving, Ren decided, grabbing her arm again. Now. As they backed toward the entrance, the crystals nearest to them began to change color, shifting from their ambient blue glow to a deep, pulsing red. The harmonic tones that had been almost musical became discordant, setting Thalia's teeth on edge. It doesn't want us to leave, she realized. It's been waiting for contact, maybe for millennia. Then it can keep waiting until we return with proper equipment and protocols, Ren replied, pulling her along. They made it back to the entrance, which still rippled like liquid stone. As they passed through, Thalia felt a final message imprint itself in her mind. We watch, we remember, we will speak again. Once outside, Ren released her arm and activated his backup communicator. We're returning to the shuttle immediately. This situation has escalated beyond our current capabilities. Lieutenant, Mox interrupted, his voice strained. The shuttle systems are being affected too. Look. In the distance, their landing craft's external lights were flickering in the same rhythmic pattern as the crystals in the cavern. The pulse had spread, transmitted somehow through the ground beneath their feet, or the air around them. "It's trying to access our technology," Wren said grimly. "Possibly our ship's database. Or it's trying to establish a more stable communication channel," Thalia argued, though a seed of doubt had begun to form. The intensity of the connection, the pressure against her mind. It had felt invasive, even as it fascinated her. They hurried back to the shuttle, the glowing path they had followed now pulsing with increasing urgency beneath their feet. The monoliths hummed louder as they passed, creating a cacophony that seemed to follow them like an invisible wave. By the time they reached the shuttle, Thalia's neural interface was emitting intermittent sparks, and she could feel blood trickling from her temple where it connected. The pain was intense, but she refused to remove the device. It was still recording, still collecting precious data about this unprecedented encounter. Mox rushed to the engineering station as soon as they were aboard, working frantically to isolate the shuttle's critical systems from the external influence. "The pulse is trying to access our navigation computers," he reported tensely. "It's like it's scanning our destination coordinates, our star charts." "Get us airborne," Wren ordered, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. "We need distance from whatever this is." As the shuttle's engines powered up, the monoliths around them began to glow brighter, their harmonic tones rising to a pitch that made the shuttle's hull vibrate. The crystalline pulse had synchronized with the craft's power systems, creating interference patterns that threatened to stall their launch. "It doesn't want us to leave," Thalia repeated, clutching her datapad as the shuttle shuddered. "It's been alone here for so long, possibly observing countless species from afar. Now that it has direct contact, it's desperate to maintain it. Or it wants our technology, our coordinates, our knowledge of human space," Wren countered, fighting with the controls. With a final surge of power, the shuttle broke free of the surface, rising through the atmosphere as the monoliths below them blazed like beacons in the gathering dusk. The pulsing interference faded as they gained altitude, though Thalia's neural interface continued to receive fragmented transmissions, broken phrases, and concepts that hinted at ancient knowledge and patient observation. "Neural connection severing at approximately 50,000 meters, she noted, recording the phenomenon. "The range seems limited to planetary proximity." "Thank God for small mercies," Mox muttered, still working to purge foreign influences from the shuttle systems. Wren set a course back to the outpost, his expression grim. "As soon as we're in range, I'm sending a priority alert to command. This planet needs to be quarantined until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." "That crystal intelligence down there is the most significant discovery in human history," Thalia protested. "We can't just lock it away behind warning buoys and forget about it." "We're not equipped to handle this level of contact," Wren replied firmly. "You saw what it did to our technology, to your neural interface. It was invasive, aggressive in its information gathering." "It was curious," Thalia corrected. "Like any intelligence encountering something new. We need to establish proper communication protocols, find a way to interact safely." "And we will," Wren said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "After command sends a properly equipped first contact team with appropriate safeguards." Thalia fell silent, turning her attention to the data she had managed to record. The crystal forest's pulses had left an enormous amount of information embedded in her neural interface, most of it fragmented and indecipherable, but some clear enough to analyze. As the shuttle broke orbit and accelerated toward their outpost, Thalia couldn't shake the feeling that they had just encountered something ancient, beyond human comprehension. A silent watcher that had perhaps observed countless civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. And now it had noticed humanity. Back at the outpost, the team immediately initiated quarantine protocols. Mox isolated their shuttle systems from the main computers, while Wren transmitted an encrypted report to Central Command, heavily redacted, Thalia noted with frustration, omitting key details about the crystal intelligence's apparent sentience. In her lab, Thalia connected her neural interface to an analog recording system that Mox had rigged up, a precaution against digital contamination. The interface still sparked occasionally, damaged by the intense connection it had experienced. But the recorded data remained intact. "I've never seen patterns like these," Mox commented, watching the pulse sequences scroll across the isolated screen. "It's like they're speaking in pure mathematics, but with emotional overtones." "That's exactly what they're doing," Thalia replied, excitement temporarily overriding her exhaustion. "The crystals communicate through resonance patterns that our neural interfaces interpret as both data and emotion. It's the most alien form of consciousness we've ever encountered, yet somehow familiar." Mox raised an eyebrow. "Familiar how?" Thalia hesitated. "The base patterns, they resemble human brainwaves. Not exactly, but close enough that our interfaces can interpret them. Almost as if they've been studying us, learning how we think." "That's unsettling," Mox admitted. "It's revolutionary," Thalia countered. "Think about it. A species that communicates through electromagnetic resonance, capable of interfacing directly with our technology. The scientific applications alone are staggering." "Assuming they're friendly," Mox pointed out. "That observation you mentioned could just as easily be surveillance. Predators study their prey too, you know." Before Thalia could respond, the lab door slid open, and Lieutenant Wren entered. His face was a carefully composed mask, but tension radiated from his rigid posture. "Command has received our preliminary report," he announced without preamble. "They're sending a specialized containment team. ETA 72 hours. "Containment," Thalia echoed, rising from her workstation. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means they're treating this as a potential threat scenario," Wren replied evenly. "The crystal entity's ability to interface with and potentially control our technology represents a security risk that cannot be ignored." "That's absurd," Thalia protested. "We've barely established contact. We have no evidence of hostile intent." "No evidence yet," Wren corrected. "But the entity's attempt to access our navigation systems and star charts suggests an interest in our capabilities and locations that goes beyond mere scientific curiosity." Mox cleared his throat uncomfortably. "He's got a point. Dr. Marin. That thing was pretty aggressive about getting into our systems." Thalia felt betrayed by Mox's sudden alignment with Wren's perspective. "It was trying to communicate. Its natural language is electromagnetic pulses. Of course, it would attempt to interface with our technology. That's like calling a human hostile for speaking loudly to someone who's hard of hearing." "Regardless," Wren continued, unmoved by her analogy, "the containment team will make the final assessment. Until they arrive, we are under strict orders to maintain quarantine and conduct no further contact attempts." "And then what?" Thalia demanded. "They'll classify everything, lock the data away, and the greatest discovery in human history becomes a military secret?" "That's not my concern," Wren replied coldly. "Nor should it be yours. We have our orders." After he left, Thalia slumped back into her chair, frustration and anger warring within her. The lieutenant's rigid adherence to military protocol threatened to suffocate the most significant scientific discovery of her career, perhaps of any human's career. "He's just doing his job," Mox offered, echoing her own words from days earlier. "His job is to facilitate scientific exploration, not obstruct it," Thalia snapped. Mox sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look, I'm as excited about this discovery as you are, but you have to admit, there's something unnerving about those crystals, the way they reached into our minds, our technology." "That's just your human-centric bias talking," Thalia argued. "We judge alien intelligence by human standards of communication and intent. What seems invasive to us might be their equivalent of a handshake." "Maybe," Mox conceded, But until we know for sure, a little caution isn't the worst idea. Thalia turned back to the recorded pulses, studying their patterns with renewed determination. If I can decode more of their language, translate their intentions more clearly, perhaps I can convince Command that this isn't a threat, but an opportunity. Mox watched her for a moment, then nodded. I'll help. But we keep this between us for now. Ren doesn't need to know we're still analyzing the data. Together, they worked through the night, feeding the recorded pulse sequences through various translation algorithms. Progress was slow and frustrating. The crystal entity's language operated on principles so alien that standard linguistic models failed to find coherent patterns. It's like trying to translate a symphony into prose, Thalia muttered after several hours of minimal progress. We're missing entire dimensions of meaning. Maybe we need to think differently, Mox suggested, rubbing his tired eyes. Instead of translating word for word, what if we look for emotional signatures? Your neural interface recorded effective patterns alongside the data. It was a brilliant suggestion. By mapping the emotional resonances embedded in the pulses, they began to extract more coherent concepts from the seemingly random patterns. Here, Thalia pointed to a sequence that repeated several times in the recording. This pattern correlates with what my interface interpreted as curiosity, but with an undertone of caution, fear. The closest translation seems to be, silence is watchful. And this one. Mox indicated another repeating sequence. Fear the silent observer. At least, that's the emotional context that matches it. And here, we were first, Thalia added. Excitement building as more phrases emerged from the data. They're trying to tell us something about their nature, their history. By morning, they had extracted several fragmented phrases that, taken together, began to form a disturbing picture. Silence is watchful. Fear the silent observer. We were first. We watch all who rise. We remember all who fall. The cycle continues. It sounds like there's some kind of cosmic record keepers, Mox suggested, his voice hushed with awe and unease. Watching civilizations rise and fall across millennia. Or longer, Thalia whispered. The emotional resonance behind we were first suggests extreme age, ancient beyond our comprehension. But what does it mean by fear the silent observer? Mox wondered. Is it warning us about something else, or about itself? Before Thalia could speculate, the outpost's alarm system blared to life. Red warning lights pulsed through the lab as Lieutenant Wren's voice came over the communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. We have detected unauthorized shuttle launch preparations. Security protocols have been compromised. Thalia and Mox exchanged confused glances. What's he talking about? Mox asked. We're the only ones here, and we've been in the lab all night. A cold realization dawned on Thalia. The crystal entity. What if its influence on our systems went deeper than we thought? What if it's still connected somehow, learning, adapting? They rushed to the outpost's main control center, where they found Wren frantically working to override the shuttle's automated launch sequence. The screens around him displayed cascading command lines as outpost systems initiated protocols without human input. What's happening? Thalia demanded. Something is accessing our systems, Wren replied, without looking up from his terminal. The shuttle's navigation computer has been compromised. It's preparing for an automated return to the crystal planet. That should be impossible, Mox protested, moving to an engineering terminal. I isolated all systems after we returned. There's no way the entity could still have access. Unless it left something behind, Thalia realized aloud. Some kind of digital spore or seed. Something that could grow into a connection once planted in our networks. Wren's expression darkened. Exactly what Command feared. This is why containment protocols exist. Dr. Marin. Ignoring his implied criticism, Thalia studied the command sequences flowing across the screens. They weren't random or destructive. They were methodical, purposeful. The entity wasn't attacking their systems. It was communicating through them, using the only language it knew humanity would understand. Their own technology. "It's trying to bring us back," she said. "It wants to continue the conversation we started. Or it wants our shuttle to deliver more technology it can assimilate," Wren countered. "Either way, we can't allow it to happen." Mox had been working furiously at his terminal, tracking the infection through their systems. "I can't isolate it," he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. "It's like trying to catch smoke with your hands. Every time I close one access point, it finds another. Then we sever all connections," Wren decided grimly. "Initiate complete system shutdown." "That would leave us without life support, communications, everything," Mox protested. "We'd be blind out here." "We have emergency backup systems," Wren replied. "They're isolated, analog controls only. Enough to sustain us until the containment team arrives." Thalia watched the pulse patterns scrolling across the screens, so similar to what she had recorded from the crystal forest. The entity was still trying to speak to them, still reaching out across the void between their worlds. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Let me try something first." Before Wren could object, she connected her damaged neural interface to the main system. Pain lanced through her temple as the connection established, but she pushed through it, focusing her thoughts. "We understand you're trying to communicate," she projected. "But this method is harmful to our technology, our safety. We need time to develop proper communication protocols." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the cascading command sequences stopped. The screen stabilized, displaying a single pulse pattern that repeated over and over. A simple acknowledgement, tinged with what Thalia's interface interpreted as reluctant acceptance. "It understands," she said, relief flooding through her. "It's backing off." Wren looked skeptical. "For now, perhaps. But this only proves how dangerous this entity could be. It penetrated our security as if it didn't exist." "It proves how advanced it is," Thalia countered. "And that it's willing to respect our boundaries when we communicate them clearly." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "We'll maintain full quarantine until the containment team arrives. And Dr. Marin, you are hereby ordered to disconnect your neural interface. It's clearly compromised and represents a security vulnerability." "You can't be serious," Thalia protested. "My interface is our only reliable means of communication with the entity." "Exactly my point," Wren replied coldly. "That connection goes both ways. Doctor, who knows what it's learning about us through you?" The accusation stung, but Thalia couldn't entirely dismiss it. The connection she had established with the crystal intelligence had been profound, almost intimate. Had it been reading her thoughts, her memories, her knowledge of human civilization all along? "Fine," she conceded reluctantly. "But I want to record one more message before I disconnect." Wren hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Make it brief, and make it clear that no further contact will be permitted until proper protocols are established." Thalia connected to the system one last time, focusing her thoughts into what she hoped would be a clear transmission. "We will return with proper means to communicate. Please be patient. Hostile actions will only delay understanding between our species." The response came immediately, a complex pulse pattern that her interface struggled to translate. The meaning was fragmented, but clear enough to send a chill down her spine. "We have watched your kind before. We will watch again. The silent ones always return." Before she could probe deeper into this cryptic message, Wren stepped forward and physically disconnected her neural interface. The abrupt severing of the connection left Thalia gasping, her mind reeling as if a part of her consciousness had been suddenly amputated. "That's enough," Wren said firmly. "Engineer Mox, initiate system-wide security protocols. I want every potential access point monitored and defended." As Mox hurried to comply, Thalia rubbed her temple where the interface had been removed, feeling strangely bereft. The crystal entity's final message echoed in her mind. "We have watched your kind before." What did that mean? Had the silent crystalline observers encountered humans previously? Or did they mean humanity's evolutionary ancestors? Or perhaps other intelligent species with similar characteristics? The implications were profound and deeply unsettling. For the next 48 hours, the outpost operated under heightened security measures. Mox worked tirelessly to purge any lingering influence of the crystal entity from their systems, while Ren maintained constant communication with the approaching containment team. Thalia, stripped of her neural interface and restricted from accessing the main computers, retreated to her quarters with the analog recordings of the crystal entity's pulse patterns. Using basic tools, pen and paper, a handheld calculator, her own memory of the emotional resonances, she continued her attempts to decode the entity's language. The work was frustrating without her neural interface to aid interpretation, but in some ways, the limitation forced her to think more creatively, to look for patterns she might have missed before. One phrase in particular kept drawing her attention: "Fear the silent observer." The emotional context suggested this wasn't merely a statement about the crystal entity itself, but a warning about something else, something that even these ancient watchers regarded with caution. But what could inspire fear in a species that had potentially existed for millions or billions of years? Late in the second night, as Thalia pored over her notes, a soft knock at her door startled her from concentration. She opened it to find Mox standing there, looking furtively down the corridor. "Can I come in?" he asked in a low voice. Thalia stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "What's wrong?" Mox closed the door behind him before speaking. "I've been analyzing the shuttle systems, the ones the entity tried to access. It wasn't random. It was looking for something specific. Our star charts," Thalia recalled. "Navigation data." "Not just any data," Mox corrected, lowering his voice further. "It was particularly interested in information about Earth." Thalia felt her pulse quicken. "Earth? You're sure?" Mox nodded grimly. "The access patterns focused on our historical archives, specifically data about human civilization's development. It was like it was confirming something it already suspected." The crystal entity's cryptic message flashed through Thalia's mind again. "We have watched your kind before." "Mox," she said slowly, "what if these crystal entities aren't just on this planet? What if they're distributed throughout the galaxy, watching, recording?" "You think they might have observers on Earth?" Mox looked disturbed by the possibility. "Or near it," Thalia suggested. "Close enough to monitor our development as a species. That would explain their familiarity with our thought patterns, their ability to interface so readily with our technology." Mox sat heavily on the edge of her bed. "So when it said, 'Fear the silent observer,' it might have been warning us about others of its kind, ones with less benign intentions? Or about itself," Thalia mused. "A species that has watched civilizations rise and fall might develop a certain detachment, a perspective that views individual species as temporary phenomena rather than equals." A troubling thought occurred to her. "Mox, did you tell Ren about the entity's specific interest in Earth?" The engineer shifted uncomfortably. "Not yet. I wanted to understand it better first. And frankly, I'm not sure how he'd react. He's already convinced the containment team needs to neutralize the crystal intelligence." "Neutralize?" Thalia repeated, alarm rising. "What exactly does that mean?" "I overheard him talking with command," Mox admitted. "The containment team is bringing explosive charges, enough to destroy the entire crystal forest and the monoliths with it." Horror washed over Thalia. "They can't do that. It would be xenocide, the murder of an entire sentient species." "They're classifying it as a preventative security measure," Mox said, his voice heavy with conflicted loyalty. Ren has convinced them that the entity represents an existential threat to human technological infrastructure. Based on what evidence? Thalia demanded. A few hours of confused first contact? We barely understand what we're dealing with. Mox spread his hands helplessly. I don't disagree with you, but the decision's been made. The containment team arrives tomorrow with specific orders. Thalia paced her small quarters, mind racing. We can't let this happen, Mox. This could be the greatest scientific discovery in human history, and they want to destroy it out of fear and ignorance. What exactly do you propose we do? Mox asked, pragmatically. We're 3 people on an isolated outpost. The containment team will have military authority and the equipment to carry out their orders. Thalia stopped pacing, a dangerous idea forming. We go back, tonight, before they arrive. What? Mox stared at her as if she'd suggested they take a spacewalk without suits. We take the shuttle, return to the crystal planet, and establish proper communication, Thalia explained, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. If we can bring back clear evidence of the entity's intelligence, its potential value to humanity, we might be able to stop the containment team from carrying out their orders. That's mutiny, Mox pointed out, and possibly suicide. We barely escaped that planet with our systems intact the first time. Because we weren't prepared, Thalia argued. This time, we'll know what to expect, and we'll bring analog recording equipment, nothing the entity can interface with directly. Mox rubbed his face wearily. Even if I agreed to this insanity, which I'm not saying I do, how would we get past Ren? He's practically living in the control center. A grim determination settled over Thalia. We don't get past him. We bring him with us. Now I know you're delirious, Mox scoffed. Ren would never agree to this. He won't have a choice, Thalia replied, her voice hardening. Not if we can prove the entity has critical information about Earth. Information that could represent a genuine security concern if left uninvestigated. Mox studied her face, recognition dawning in his eyes. You're going to lie to him. Not lie, Thalia corrected. Present the facts in a way that aligns with his priorities. The entity specifically sought information about Earth. That's true. The containment team won't arrive for another 24 hours. Also true. If there's a genuine threat to Earth, wouldn't a loyal military officer want to assess it before it's potentially destroyed? That's manipulative, Mox said, though she could see he was considering the logic. It's necessary, Thalia insisted. Lives are at stake, potentially an entire sentient species. Sometimes the rules have to bend when the stakes are this high. After a long moment, Mox nodded reluctantly. I still think this is crazy, but I'll help. What's your plan? Lieutenant Jor Ren was exactly where they expected to find him, in the outpost control center, monitoring communications with the approaching containment vessel. His expression was grim as he studied the tactical displays, shoulders tense with anticipation. Lieutenant, Thalia began formally as she and Mox entered. We need to discuss a significant development regarding the crystal entity. Ren glanced up, suspicion immediately evident in his gaze. Dr. Marin, I thought I ordered you to remain in your quarters until the containment team arrives. You did, she acknowledged. But Engineer Mox has discovered something in the shuttle's systems that you need to see immediately. Ren's attention shifted to Mox, who stepped forward with a datapad. I've been analyzing the entity's access patterns, Mox explained, displaying a complex diagram of system infiltration. It wasn't randomly probing our technology. It was specifically targeting information about Earth, our home planet. Ren's expression darkened. Explain. The entity concentrated its efforts on historical archives, developmental timelines of human civilization, and geographical data about Earth. Mox continued, the half-truth flowing convincingly. It was like it was confirming something it already knew. which aligns with a message I received through my neural interface before you ordered me to disconnect. Thalia added. We have watched your kind before. Lieutenant, I believe these crystal entities may have been observing Earth for centuries, possibly longer. Ren absorbed this information with growing concern. If that's true, it represents an even greater security threat than we initially assessed. Exactly, Thalia agreed, careful to match his grave tone. And the containment team plans to destroy the entity before we can determine what it knows about Earth, about humanity's vulnerabilities. Their orders are clear, Ren replied, though she detected a note of uncertainty in his voice. Orders based on incomplete information. Thalia pressed. Lieutenant, if there are more of these entities out there, perhaps even near Earth, destroying this one without learning what it knows could leave us blind to a potential threat. Ren paced the control center, military discipline warring with strategic consideration. What are you suggesting, Doctor? One more expedition, Thalia proposed. A final attempt to communicate with the entity, specifically about its knowledge of Earth. We use analog equipment only, minimizing the risk of technological compromise. The containment team arrives in 22 hours, Ren pointed out, which gives us enough time for a brief, targeted mission, Thalia countered. In and out with critical intelligence that could inform their containment strategy. Mox added his support, though Thalia could see his discomfort with the deception. From an engineering perspective, I can modify our equipment to minimize vulnerability. The risk is manageable for a short expedition. Ren fell silent, weighing the proposal against his orders. Finally, he looked up. Decision made. 6 hours, he said firmly. We launch immediately, spend no more than 4 hours on the surface, and return with 2 hours to spare before the containment team's arrival. Our objective is intelligence gathering only. No attempts at diplomatic contact. No scientific exploration beyond what's necessary to assess the threat potential. Relief flooded through Thalia, though she kept her expression professionally neutral. Agreed. We should prepare immediately. As they dispersed to gather equipment, Thalia caught Mox's troubled gaze. The engineer clearly disliked the manipulation they had employed, but he offered a small nod of solidarity. Their plan had worked. Now, they just had to survive its execution. Within an hour, the shuttle was prepped for launch. Mox had jury-rigged an impressive array of analog recording equipment, mechanical devices that functioned without digital components that could be compromised by the crystal entity's influence. Ren insisted on arming the shuttle with defensive measures, including, Thalia noted with alarm, a set of explosive charges as a last resort. She said nothing. However, recognizing that pushing back now would only jeopardize the mission. As they launched and broke orbit, Thalia stared out at the stars, thoughts turning to her sister Eleni. Would she have approved of this deception, this risk? Probably not. Eleni had always been the cautious one, the voice of reason that balanced Thalia's impulsivity. But she would have understood the stakes, the irreversible destruction of a unique intelligence in the name of fear and security. Some risks were worth taking, even at great personal cost. The journey to the crystal planet was tense and largely silent. Ren focused on piloting, occasionally checking in with the outpost to maintain the illusion that this was a sanctioned intelligence-gathering mission. Mox busied himself with final adjustments to their equipment, avoiding Thalia's gaze. As they approached the planet, the familiar ion storms buffeted the shuttle, though less severely than during their first visit. The monoliths came into view as they descended through the atmosphere, still standing like sentinels across the barren landscape, but now pulsing with a steady, synchronized light that seemed to track their approach. They're aware we're returning, Thalia observed, watching the patterns spread across the structures below. They're tracking us, Ren corrected grimly, confirming what we suspected about their observational capabilities. They landed in the same clearing as before. The shuttle, settling on the luminescent gravel with a gentle shudder. Outside, the monoliths hummed with visible anticipation, their surfaces rippling with patterns that reminded Thalia of neural activity. "We proceed together," Ren instructed, checking his weapon. "Standard defensive formation. At the first sign of hostile action or technological compromise, we abort. Is that clear?" "Clear," Thalia and Mox echoed. Though Thalia had no intention of leaving, before establishing meaningful communication with the crystal entity, they disembarked into the cold, thin air of the alien world. Immediately, the ground beneath their feet began to glow, forming the same pathway they had followed previously, leading to the concealed entrance of the crystal forest's cavern. "They're inviting us back," Thalia said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "They're directing us where they want us," Ren countered suspiciously. "Not necessarily the same thing." As they followed the glowing path between towering monoliths, Thalia noticed subtle differences from their first visit. The humming tones were more harmonious now, less discordant. The patterns on the monolith's surfaces seemed more organized, as if the entity had refined its communication attempts. Without her neural interface, Thalia couldn't receive the entity's transmissions directly, but she could feel its presence nonetheless, a pressure in the air, an almost subliminal vibration that seemed to resonate with her body's natural electrical field. They reached the entrance to the cavern, which rippled open at their approach just as it had before. This time, however, the opening was larger, more defined, less a disorienting distortion of reality and more a deliberate doorway. "They've adapted their environment to accommodate us," Thalia observed. "That shows both intelligence and intent to facilitate communication, or to lure us more effectively," Ren muttered, but he led the way inside nonetheless, weapon ready. The crystal forest within the cavern had changed as well. The formations were arranged differently now, with clear pathways between them and what appeared to be a central clearing where the largest crystals converged. The pulsing light within each crystal seemed more focused, more coherent, less a chaotic display, and more a structured language of illumination. "They've reorganized," Mox whispered, awe evident in his voice despite his earlier reservations. "This is deliberate," Thalia nodded, setting up the analog recording equipment Mox had prepared. "They're trying to communicate more effectively. They've learned from our previous interaction." The central clearing drew them forward. As they approached, the largest crystal formations began to pulse in a synchronized pattern that Thalia recognized from her previous recordings, the same sequence that had translated to "Who sits in silence?" "They're asking who we are again," she told the others. "The same initial question." Ren scanned the crystal forest suspiciously. "How can you tell without your neural interface?" "I memorized the patterns," Thalia explained. "The rhythms, the frequencies. This is a repeated phrase from our first contact." Using Mox's analog recorder, Thalia captured the pulse sequences, correlating them with her notes. Even without her neural interface, she could begin to discern patterns, to recognize repeated phrases and emotional resonances. "They're asking about Earth," she realized, studying a particular sequence. The same pattern that appeared when the entity accessed our shuttle's archives about human civilization. Ren stepped closer, his suspicion momentarily overcome by strategic interest. "What exactly are they asking?" Thalia hesitated, not wanting to alarm him further, but needing to maintain his cooperation. "It's not a precise translation, but the emotional context suggests curiosity, recognition, as if confirming something they already suspected." The crystal formations pulsed more intensely, their light focusing on the three humans, as if examining them. New patterns emerged, complex, layered sequences that Thalia struggled to interpret without her neural connection. "They're trying to establish a clearer communication channel," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "But without my interface, I can't fully receive what they're sending. That's by design, Ren reminded her. We can't risk compromising our minds again. Thalia bit back her argument, knowing it would only harden his position. Instead, she focused on the recording equipment, capturing as much data as possible for later analysis. As they worked, Mox circled the central clearing, scanning the crystal formations with his engineering tools. These aren't just random growths, he reported. There's structure here, organization down to the molecular level. It's like living technology. The crystals nearest to Mox brightened in response to his observations, pulses quickening, as if pleased by his understanding. A new pattern spread through the forest, ripples of light that reminded Thalia of laughter. They appreciate being recognized, she translated, smiling despite the tension. They're responding to Mox's assessment. For nearly 2 hours, they recorded the crystal entity's communications, gradually building a rudimentary lexicon of pulse patterns and their apparent meanings. Without the direct neural connection, progress was slow and imprecise. But Thalia felt a growing sense of achievement nonetheless. Then, abruptly, the entire crystal forest shifted to a new pattern. Uniform, urgent, almost alarming in its intensity. The harmonics changed to a lower frequency that vibrated uncomfortably through their bodies. "What's happening?" Ren demanded, weapon raised instinctively. "I'm not sure," Thalia admitted, studying the new pattern. "This is different from anything I've recorded before." Mox, who had wandered closer to the edge of the clearing, called out suddenly. "There's movement in the crystals! They're growing, changing shape." Indeed, the formations at the center of the clearing were shifting, extending toward each other, merging into new configurations that rose from the cavern floor like liquid glass, solidifying into form. Within minutes, a new structure stood before them, a crystalline approximation of a human figure, featureless, but unmistakable in its humanoid proportions. "They're trying to mimic us," Thalia breathed, amazement temporarily overriding scientific detachment. "Creating a physical form we can relate to." The crystal humanoid inclined its featureless head toward them, then raised what approximated an arm, pointing directly at Thalia's temple, where her neural interface would normally be connected. "It wants me to reconnect," she realized. "To establish direct communication?" "Absolutely not," Ren interjected immediately. "That's exactly the vulnerability they exploited before." The crystal figure remained motionless, arm extended, lights pulsing through its translucent body in patterns Thalia recognized as request, urgency, importance. "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "this may be our only chance to understand what they know about Earth, about humanity. Isn't that why we came back?" Ren's jaw tightened. "We came for intelligence gathering, not to offer them direct access to a human mind. My neural interface is still damaged from the previous connection," Thalia pointed out. "Its functionality is limited, which also limits the entity's ability to access information through it. The risk is minimal compared to the potential knowledge we could gain." The crystal humanoid pulsed more urgently, its form beginning to lose cohesion as if the effort of maintaining it was straining the entity's resources. "We're running out of time," Thalia pressed. "They're trying to show us something important, something they can't communicate without a direct connection." Ren's internal conflict was visible in his expression. Duty warring with curiosity, protocol with opportunity. Finally, he gave a curt nod. 5 minutes, he conceded reluctantly. "Establish connection for exactly 5 minutes, then terminate regardless of what you've learned. Engineer Mox will monitor your vital signs and neural activity. At the first sign of distress or compromise, we pull you out forcibly if necessary." Thalia nodded, already retrieving her neural interface from the equipment case where she'd stored it. The device was damaged, its connection points scorched from the previous overload, but still functional enough for basic transmission. With steady hands, she connected the interface to her temple, wincing at the sharp pain as damaged circuits established contact with her neural pathways. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a flood of information crashed into her consciousness like a tidal wave. Images, concepts, emotions, all transmitted at a speed and density that threatened to overwhelm her human mind. Thalia gasped, struggling to process the torrent of alien thought. "We have waited. We have watched. We remember." The words formed in her mind, clearer now than during their first contact. Behind them lurked vast reservoirs of memory, ancient beyond human comprehension, stretching back to the birth of stars. "You are not the first to walk between worlds. You will not be the last." The pattern repeats. Thalia focused, trying to direct the communication towards specific questions. "What do you know about Earth? About humans?" The response came as a cascade of images, Earth seen from impossible vantage points throughout its history. Primordial oceans, the rise of early life, the evolution of mammals, the first human ancestors, civilization emerging, spreading, developing, all observed in silence by crystalline watchers hidden in plain sight, in mountains, in deep ocean trenches, in remote deserts. "You have been watching us," Thalia realized with a shock that reverberated through the connection. "For how long?" "Since before you were. We watch all who might ascend." "Why?" Thalia pressed, aware of Mox and Ren watching her with concern as she communicated silently with the entity. "To remember, to record, to wait." "Wait for what?" Instead of words, the entity transmitted a visceral vision, a vast, cosmic perspective that showed countless civilizations rising across the galaxy, developing technology, expanding outward, and then falling silent, one by one. Some destroyed themselves. Others simply disappeared. A few transcended in ways Thalia's human mind could barely comprehend. And through it all, the silent crystal watchers observed, recorded, remembered. "You warn others to fear the silent observer," Thalia thought, recalling the phrase they had translated earlier. "Do you mean yourselves?" A sensation like bitter amusement flowed through the connection. "We are not the silence to fear. We speak through light and resonance. True silence is more terrible." "I don't understand." The crystal humanoid stepped closer, its form becoming more defined as it focused its communication directly into Thalia's mind. "Humanity speaks loudly, broadcasts signals, announces presence. This is dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Alarm prickled through Thalia's consciousness. The hunters in darkness listen for such sounds. They find those who speak too loudly. They silence them forever. With this warning came a flood of fragmented memories. Distant worlds reduced to lifeless husks. Civilizations extinguished in sudden cataclysms. Star systems quarantined by forces beyond human comprehension. "Are these hunters coming for Earth?" Thalia asked, fear gripping her heart. "They are always coming. For all who speak without listening first. The silent species survives. The loud ones perish." The implications were staggering. Earth had been broadcasting radio signals into space for over a century, announcing humanity's presence to the cosmos without consideration for what might be listening. "How can we protect ourselves?" Thalia asked desperately. "Learn silence. Listen before speaking. Watch before moving." The crystal entity's form began to flicker, the connection between them growing strained as Thalia's damaged neural interface struggled to maintain the information flow. "We have watched humanity since its birth," the entity continued, urgency coloring its communication. "You stand at the threshold now. Choose silence or be silenced." "Dr. Marin," Ren's voice broke through her concentration. "Your 5 minutes are up. Disconnect now." Thalia barely heard him, focused on one last desperate question. "How much time do we have?" The answer came not in words but in a vision. Earth's sun completing several more orbits around the galactic center. Not immediate danger. Then, but not distant either. Decades. perhaps a century or two at most. We will watch them come. The entity transmitted as a final message. As we have watched them come for others, silence begets fear, but speech brings death. Dr. Marin, Wren's voice was sharper now. Terminate the connection immediately. Thalia became aware that the lieutenant had drawn his weapon, aiming it not at her, but at the crystal humanoid before her. At the same moment, she noticed Mox moving surreptitiously behind one of the larger crystal formations, his hands working quickly at something she couldn't see. With painful reluctance, Thalia reached up to disconnect her neural interface, but before she could, Wren spoke into his communicator. Activating remote detonation sequence. Charges will deploy in 2 minutes. Begin evacuation immediately. Horror washed through Thalia as understanding dawned. Detonation? What charges? The ones I placed around the cavern entrance while you were communing with these things. Wren replied grimly. The containment team isn't coming to assess this entity. Doctor, they're coming to confirm its destruction. You lied to us, Thalia accused, anger rising to match her horror. I followed orders, Wren corrected, backing toward the cavern entrance. Command deemed this entity too dangerous to study, too unpredictable to contain. The decision was made before we even returned to the outpost after our first contact. You can't do this, Thalia protested, turning to the crystal humanoid whose form was now pulsing with what her interface translated as alarm, confusion. They're ancient, irreplaceable. They have knowledge that spans millions of years. Knowledge that represents a threat to human security, Wren countered. You said it yourself. They've been watching Earth, monitoring our development. For all we know, they could be the advanced scouts for an invasion force. They're historians, not conquerors, Thalia shouted, desperation making her voice crack. They're trying to warn us about actual threats out there. Wren's expression hardened. We have 90 seconds to evacuate before this entire cavern collapses. I suggest you disconnect from that thing and start moving. As Thalia hesitated, torn between duty and discovery, the crystal humanoid suddenly moved, reaching out to touch her neural interface directly. A blinding surge of information flooded her mind, bypassing the damaged device entirely and creating a direct connection between her consciousness and the crystal entity's vast intelligence. Thalia gasped as visions overwhelmed her, not just of Earth's past now, but of countless civilizations across the galaxy. She saw worlds in flame, planets quarantined, entire species going silent to hide from something that hunted through the darkness between stars. She saw the Crystal Watchers, patient and eternal, recording it all in their living memory. And she saw what they feared: vast, ancient intelligences that drifted through the void, drawn to the electromagnetic signatures of developing technological civilizations, predators that harvested worlds which announced their presence too loudly, too soon. They're trying to save us, she managed to gasp, even as the connection threatened to overwhelm her human mind. Lieutenant, they're not the threat, they're the warning system. The crystal humanoid began to dissolve, its carefully maintained form melting back into the forest as energy was redirected to protect the collective consciousness from the impending destruction. The pulse frequency throughout the cavern spiked dramatically, creating interference that caused their equipment to spark and fail. 70 seconds to detonation, Wren announced, his voice tight with tension. Dr. Marin, we need to evacuate now. Mox appeared suddenly at Thalia's side. I've sabotaged the main detonator, he whispered urgently. But we need to get out of here to sell it. Come on. Still reeling from the direct mental connection, Thalia allowed Mox to pull her toward the exit. The crystal forest pulsed around them in patterns she now recognized as distress, farewell, and, most surprisingly, gratitude. As they reached the cavern entrance, Wren ushered them through with his weapon still drawn. Move faster. The secondary charges will still trigger, even if the main detonator fails. They sprinted across the barren landscape toward the waiting shuttle. The monoliths around them humming with increasing intensity as the crystal entity's consciousness spread throughout its network. The ground beneath their feet glowed brighter than before, almost painfully brilliant. "What did you see?" Mox asked breathlessly as they ran. "What did it show you?" "Everything," Thalia gasped. "The history of 1,000 worlds. The fate of countless civilizations. Earth isn't the first world they've watched, just the latest in a long cycle." They reached the shuttle just as Ren's timer counted down to 30 seconds. The lieutenant practically shoved them inside, sealing the airlock behind them and rushing to the pilot's seat. "Launch sequence initiated," he announced, his fingers flying across the controls. "Brace for emergency ascent." As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Thalia looked back through the viewport at the monolith field. The structures were now blazing with light, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal as some kind of energy transfer occurred between them. "It's moving," she realized aloud. "The entity is redistributing its consciousness throughout the network, protecting itself from the explosion." "Clever rocks," Mox muttered, though there was admiration in his voice. The shuttle lifted off with a violent jerk, accelerating upward just as the timer reached 0. Below them, a series of explosions rippled across the monolith field, but smaller, more contained than they should have been with the main detonator active. "Something's wrong with the charges," Ren said grimly, checking his tactical display. "The primary explosives didn't trigger properly." "What a shame," Mox deadpanned, avoiding Thalia's gaze. As they climbed through the atmosphere, Thalia kept her eyes fixed on the scene below. The explosions had damaged several of the monoliths, but the majority remained standing. More importantly, the hidden cavern entrance appeared intact, its location now obscured by dust and debris. "We'll have to report partial mission failure," Ren said as they broke orbit. "The containment team will need to place stronger charges when they arrive." "I'm not sure that will be necessary, Lieutenant," Thalia replied carefully. "Look at your sensors." The tactical display showed the planet's surface growing calm again, the energy signatures they had previously detected fading rapidly until they disappeared entirely. To all instruments, the world below now appeared as it had during their initial survey months ago, seemingly lifeless, geologically unremarkable. "They've gone dormant," Thalia explained, "or they're masking their presence. Either way, there's nothing down there for the containment team to find anymore." Ren's expression darkened with suspicion. "What exactly did that thing show you before we left, Doctor?" Thalia chose her words carefully, aware that her answer would shape the official report, and potentially the fate of the crystal entity. "It showed me that there are forces in the galaxy far more dangerous than silent observers. Predators that hunt civilizations that announce their presence too loudly, too early in their development." "So it claims," Ren said skeptically. "Convenient that its solution is to leave it alive and watching us." "It's been watching Earth since before humans evolved, Lieutenant," Thalia countered. "If it meant us harm, it could have acted long ago." The journey back to the outpost passed in tense silence. Ren focused on piloting, occasionally shooting suspicious glances at Thalia and Mox. For her part, Thalia used the time to organize her thoughts, to sift through the vast download of information the crystal entity had implanted directly in her mind during their final connection. Much of it was too alien, too complex for her human brain to fully comprehend. But certain concepts stood out with crystalline clarity. Watch. Listen. Learn silence. Beware those who hunt the unwary. And beneath it all, a promise. We will watch them come. We will warn those who listen. When they docked at the outpost, they found an urgent message waiting from command. The containment team had been delayed by ion storm activity and wouldn't arrive for another 48 hours. Ren immediately sequestered himself in the communication center to deliver his report, leaving Thalia and Mox momentarily unobserved. "What did you do to the charges?" Thalia asked quietly, as they unloaded their equipment. Mox shrugged, a hint of satisfaction in his otherwise neutral expression. Rerouted the primary detonation circuit through a faulty capacitor, caused a power drop just enough to prevent full ignition of the main explosives. The secondaries still went off, but without the primary charge to amplify them. "Thank you," Thalia said with genuine gratitude. "You risked court-martial. For the greatest scientific discovery in human history?" Mox raised an eyebrow. "Seemed worth it. Besides, I trust your judgment. If you say these crystal watchers are trying to help us, I believe you." Thalia hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, a fragment of crystal she had instinctively grabbed during their hasty evacuation. It glowed faintly with an inner light, pulsing occasionally in rhythm with her own heartbeat. "Is that what I think it is?" Mox asked, eyes widening. "A piece of the entity," Thalia confirmed. "Separated from the main consciousness, but still aware, somehow. I think it allowed itself to be taken, a kind of ambassador, or maybe an insurance policy." Mox stared at the crystal fragment with a mixture of awe and concern. "Ren would confiscate that in a heartbeat if he knew." "Which is why he won't know," Thalia replied, carefully returning the fragment to her pocket. "This stays between us until I can figure out how to protect it and what it can teach us." Over the next 2 days, Thalia worked feverishly to analyze the data they had collected, all while secretly communing with the crystal fragment. The shard's consciousness was limited compared to the vast intelligence of the complete entity, but it still contained enough information to confirm her most important conclusions. The Crystal Watchers were indeed ancient observers, stationed throughout the galaxy to monitor the rise and fall of technological civilizations. They served as both historians and wardens, recording the past while watching for threats from the darkness between stars. More urgently, they had observed a pattern that humanity was now unwittingly following, broadcasting our presence to the cosmos before developing the means to defend ourselves from what might answer. When the containment team finally arrived, Lieutenant Wren delivered his report in person, detailing their expedition, the partial failure of the explosive charges, and the subsequent disappearance of all detectable signs of the crystal entity. "In my assessment," he concluded stiffly, "the entity has either been destroyed or has gone dormant beyond our ability to detect. Either way, it no longer represents an active threat to this outpost or to wider human interests." Thalia, present for this debriefing, carefully maintained a neutral expression. Wren's conclusion wasn't technically false. The entity had indeed concealed itself beyond their ability to detect. But his implication that the threat had been neutralized revealed how little he had understood of what they had encountered. The containment team commander, a stern woman named Major Voss, studied the sensor readings with a frown. "You're certain the entity was attempting to access information about Earth specifically?" "Yes," Wren confirmed. "It demonstrated particular interest in human developmental history and technological capabilities. For purposes of observation, not exploitation," Thalia interjected, unable to remain silent. "My analysis suggests this entity belongs to a species that has observed countless civilizations throughout the galaxy, including our own. Their purpose appears to be preservation of knowledge, not interference." Major Voss regarded her coolly. "And you base this assessment on what?" "Dr. Marin, the entity's own claims during your unauthorized neural connection. On pattern analysis of their communication methods, behavioral observations during multiple encounters, and comparison with xenopsychological models," Thalia replied evenly, omitting mention of the direct mental download she had received. "Nothing in their actions suggests hostile intent. If anything, they attempted to warn us about genuine threats elsewhere in the galaxy." The Major's skepticism was evident, but after reviewing the sensor data showing no current activity on the planet's surface, she made her decision. "We'll maintain the quarantine protocol on this system, but further destructive measures seem unnecessary at this time. The entity appears to have either been eliminated or has removed itself as a factor. It was a reprieve, if not a complete victory. The Crystal Watchers would be left in peace, at least for now, while humanity remained ignorant of both their continued existence and their ancient warning. After the containment team departed, taking Lieutenant Wren with them for reassignment, Thalia found herself alone in the outpost with only Mox for company. Their research mission would continue for another 3 months before their scheduled rotation back to Earth. "What will you do with it?" Mox asked one evening, nodding toward the crystal fragment that now sat on Thalia's desk, partially concealed within a modified scanner housing. Thalia watched the gentle pulses of light within the crystal, synchronized, she had discovered, with her own neural patterns when she concentrated on it. A connection remained between them, subtler than before but persistent. "Study it," she replied. "Learn from it. Try to understand what it's been trying to tell us." "And when we return to Earth," Mox pressed, "the military will never allow you to keep an alien artifact, especially one from a quarantine system." Thalia smiled faintly. "By then, I hope to have learned enough to make them listen. The crystal entity didn't just show me threats, Mox. It showed me possibilities, ways that humanity might evolve beyond our current limitations, if we survive long enough." She didn't tell him about the other visions the entity had shared, glimpses of her sister Eleni that felt too personal, too raw to discuss. Not memories exactly, but possibilities. Patterns that suggested her sister's consciousness might have been preserved somehow during the neural control malfunction that had claimed her life. Another mystery to explore when she returned to Earth. "Besides," she added more lightly, "the fragment seems to have bonded with me somehow. I'm not entirely sure it can be separated from me now, even if they tried." Mox shook his head with a rueful smile. "You xenopsychologists and your attachment issues." As the weeks passed, Thalia continued her official survey work while secretly communicating with the crystal fragment. Through patient experimentation, she learned to interpret more of its subtle pulses, to distinguish between its attempts to share information and its own observations of her. The fragment was learning from her, just as she learned from it, studying human thought patterns, emotions, priorities. A mutual exchange of understanding that felt less like scientific research and more like friendship. One night, as Thalia sat recording her observations, she felt a sudden shift in the fragment's pulse pattern, an urgency she hadn't sensed before. The crystal glowed brighter, its internal structure reorganizing visibly as it focused its limited energy. A message formed in her mind, clearer than any the fragment had managed before. "They have noticed. Earth speaks too loudly. Prepare." Thalia felt a chill run down her spine. "How much time do we have?" she whispered aloud. The fragment pulsed again, struggling to convey complex temporal concepts through their limited connection. The impression Thalia received was measured in human generations, perhaps 3 or 4, before the hunters would reach Earth's vicinity. Decades, not centuries. Enough time to prepare, if humanity took the warning seriously, if they learned to listen before speaking, to watch before moving, if they understood the value of silence in a universe where predators hunted by sound. Thalia activated her recorder, beginning what would become the most important document of her career, perhaps of human history. "Xenopsychology Special Report, The Silent Watchers," she began. "What follows is an analysis of a non-human intelligence whose existence predates humanity itself, and whose warnings may determine our species' survival." As she worked through the night, recording everything she had learned from the crystal entity, Thalia occasionally glanced out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a planet now officially designated as uninhabited, the Crystal Watchers continued their ancient vigil, observing, recording, remembering. And somewhere beyond them, in the darkness between stars, something else was moving, something that hunted civilizations that announced themselves too boldly. Too soon. The crystal fragment pulsed steadily on her desk, a silent reminder of the warning she now carried. Humanity must learn to sit in silence, to observe without being observed, or join the countless species that had spoken too loudly, too soon, and been forever silenced. When the shuttle finally arrived to transport them back to Earth, Thalia carefully secured the crystal fragment in a shielded container disguised as research equipment. Its soft pulses had become a comfort to her, a reminder that humanity was not alone in the cosmos, for better or worse. As they broke orbit for the last time, Thalia looked down at the seemingly barren planet where the crystal watchers waited in silence. Now, she understood their warning completely. The species that sits in silence, that's humanity. Be afraid. Not afraid of humanity itself, but afraid for humanity's survival in a universe where silence was safety. And those who spoke without listening rarely lived long enough to be heard. Now they know we see them, too, she whispered to herself as the planet receded from view and they jumped to hyperspace. In her secure container, the crystal fragment pulsed in agreement. Silence begets fear, but it also grants survival. And the silent watchers would follow humanity to its doorstep, not as invaders, but as ancient guides trying to teach the youngest species in the galaxy how to survive in a cosmos where being noticed was the first step toward extinction.